Well, the main principle of rehabilitation is to set goals. It's by setting goals we know how the patient is progressing and the team know how they're progressing. Those goals have got to be measurable, and specifically they've got to be what's called SMART. They've got to be specific, they've got to be measurable, they've got to be achievable, they've got to be realistic or relevant to that person, and they've got to be time limited. For example, you can set a goal that says, in this admission, for someone, say, with a stroke, we want to walk better. Now that's a perfectly good outcome, but it's not as specific as we want it. So it may be better to have something, for example, we'd like you to walk without a mobility aid for 10 metres in 30 seconds. Now that's quite specific, it's quite measurable, it's hopefully achievable after discussion with the patient and the team, it's relevant to them, and it's time limited, or it should be time limited. You can have long-term goals and you can have short-term goals that monitor progress week to week or fortnight to fortnight. Now, we don't want the outcome measures to dominate the whole team. So they've got to be simple. And they can be very simple. That one I've just mentioned can, for example, just be using a stopwatch and a tape measure. But there are nevertheless accepted outcome scales. And indeed, in the literature, there's well over 60 of these that we can use. And it's best to use a scale that is well known and well recognized. Any scale has got to be valid. In other words, it's got to measure what we want it to measure. It's got to be reliable. So someone assessing someone today gets the same score tomorrow. Or two different therapists assessing someone on the same day also get the same score. Otherwise, the outcome is meaningless. It's got to be simple. It's got to be understandable. And most particularly, it's got to be not time-consuming. We don't want the whole rehabilitation centre just focused on measuring outcomes rather than actually doing the work. You can have outcomes that measure various aspects. If a unit is mainly focused on physical matters, you can have physical outcome scales, and in a minute I'll go through one of those. If it's relevant, you can have emotional outcomes. So is the person depressed or anxious, and are they improving? Cognitive outcomes, such as monitoring problems with memory, concentration, attention, how people communicate, both whether they have slurred speech and whether that's improving, or whether they can communicate in society as a whole. Behavioural outcomes, particularly relevant to units that manage people with challenging behaviour. And broader societal outcomes, so is the person integrated best into society, into their work, into their family, into their play and hobbies. So I'm not going to go through a lot of these, but I thought I'd just mention three of the commonest outcome scales to give people an idea of what we're talking about. So one, I want to take an example of the Bartel Index, which is very well known. This is mainly a measure of physical functioning. It measures bowel, bladder function, actual use of the toilet, grooming, feeding, transferring, mobility, stairs, dressing and bathing. So quite a range of physical outcomes. And it's got basically 0 if you're dependent on others and can't do that, and 2 or sometimes 3 if you're fully independent. So let's take a specific example to illustrate what I'm talking about. And for example, bladder. You'd score 0 if you're incontinent, 1 if you have occasional accidents, not more than once every 24 hours, and 2 if you're fully continent. Mobility, you'd score 0 if you're immobile, 1 if you're wheelchair dependent, 2 if you walk with help, whether that be physical or verbal prompting from one person, and 3 if you're independent. And all that comes to a maximum score of 20. So for example, a person may score 6 or 8 when they come into a unit, and hopefully 20 when they go out of a unit fully independent. But it can monitor progress during the course of that rehabilitation program. So the person, their family, and the whole team can determine and monitor the progress. So let me look at another one. It's called the FIM-FAM. That stands for Functional Independence Measure and Functional Assessment Measure. 2 well-known scales that have been amalgamated. And this enables the person to be scored on 30 different types of function, from physical functioning through to communication functioning, cognitive functioning, and integration into society. So it's a very comprehensive measure. And you score 1 if you're completely dependent, you can't do that task, up to 7 if you're fully independent. And the nice thing about the FIM-FAM is it enables you graphically to see how the person is doing. You can see areas that are improving well and areas that are not improving, and maybe the team need to focus on those areas. So have a look at this, what is called a fim-fam splat on the screen. And this shows you the different subtypes, the different areas which we score. There's 30 altogether. And in this case, this is a young man who came into the unit for just 6 weeks after a car accident causing a brain injury. And you can see from this in the light blue areas how he was functioning when he came in. And in this example, he didn't have any bowel or bladder problems, for example. And over time, the dark blue areas show that he improved in nearly all the functions, and when he went out, he was actually completely independent, except for just a little bit of problems with his memory. So that's a nice way of showing and monitoring progress in a very visual and very immediate form. The last one I want to mention as an example is called the GAS. That's the Goal Attainment Scale. And the nice thing about this is it's very much focused on the patient, on the individual that the team is working with. They set the goals, they set the tasks that they want to improve upon. And if after some discussion with the team, that's a reasonable, achievable goal, then that's the goal that's set, and the GAS simply scores how much towards that goal is actually attained in a set time scale. And the nice thing about that is the whole team gets involved, the whole team plays a role in setting those goals, and that team includes the patient and the family as relevant. So there are 3 examples, but as I said, there's many more that focus on different aspects of improvement or focus on the whole patient, if you like. So to summarise, why are we doing this? It's a fundamental part of the rehabilitation progress. It shows progress in the individual, so the person and their family can see they're actually still improving. And people can say, look, you are better here and here than you were when you came in. So progress can be monitored in a structured way. It can be useful, of course, for the whole unit, statistics to be collated. And so we've got 80% of people better over this period of time, or 90% of people improved at least by that percentage. So it's useful to compare how that unit's doing with, for example, other similar units. And finally, these days, people in rehabilitation units have to be paid for, whether by the NHS or privately, independently. But nevertheless, we need to convince those who are paying, the commissioners, the CCGs as they're called, that the person is still making progress, so we can justify the person remaining in the unit whilst they're still improving, so they go home with their maximum independence. And that's the principle of outcome measurement, and one that any good rehabilitation unit should be using.